The Creature from Jekyll Island, a critical examination of Griffin's argument against the Federal Reserve. George Edward Griffin's The Creature from Jekyll Island, 1994, is both a financial history and a political manifesto. Written in a polemical style, the book seeks to expose what Griffin describes as the fraudulent and destructive nature of the U.S. Federal Reserve System. Its central claim is that the Federal Reserve is not a neutral government institution designed to stabilize the economy, but rather a cartel of private bankers who conspired to enrich themselves at the expense of the American public. While the book has had significant influence in libertarian and populist circles, its arguments have also been criticized for conspiracy-driven interpretations and a selective reading of history. Griffin's core arguments. Griffin situates the birth of the Federal Reserve in a secret meeting held in 1910 on Jekyll Island, Georgia. He portrays this meeting as the pivotal moment when powerful banking interests, J.P. Morgan, Rockefeller allies, and others, crafted a plan to establish a central bank that would allow them to control credit, manipulate markets, and finance government expansion. The foundation of his critique rests on several interrelated claims. 1. The Federal Reserve as a banking cartel. Griffin argues that the Fed was designed not for public benefit, but for private profit. By controlling money creation, banks could generate credit out of nothing, reap interest on it, and pass the risks of collapse onto the public. 2. The Mandrake mechanism and inflation. He introduces the concept of the Mandrake mechanism, his term for fractional reserve banking. This system, he contends, inevitably leads to inflation, wealth redistribution, and cycles of boom and bust, all engineered by the Fed to protect banking elites. 3. Financing war and government expansion. Griffin links central banking directly to modern warfare, arguing that without the Fed's ability to expand credit, the U.S. could not have financed its participation in World War I, World War II, or subsequent military interventions. 4. The march toward global centralization. Finally, Griffin suggests that the Fed is only one part of a broader strategy to create a global central bank and world currency, ultimately placing financial sovereignty in the hands of a transnational elite. Strengths of the book. The book's enduring appeal lies in its narrative clarity and accessible critique of money creation. Griffin presents complex economic mechanisms in vivid language, making the workings of central banking comprehensible to general readers. His emphasis on the historical secrecy of the Jekyll Island meeting, an event confirmed by mainstream historians, though far less sinister in their accounts, provides a powerful symbolic anchor for his argument. Additionally, Griffin taps into genuine public concerns, the lack of transparency in monetary policy, the recurring financial crises of the 20th century, and the sense that ordinary citizens bear the costs of elite decisions. These themes resonate particularly in times of economic instability, giving the book renewed life during each financial downturn. Weaknesses and criticisms. Despite its influence, Griffin's work faces significant scholarly criticism. 1. Over-reliance on conspiracy frameworks. While the Jekyll Island meeting was real, historians generally interpret it as a pragmatic attempt to stabilize chaotic banking systems of the era, not as a conspiracy for world domination. Griffin's insistence on framing the Fed's creation as a sinister plot weakens his credibility with mainstream scholars. 2. Selective use of evidence. Griffin often highlights episodes of financial instability or government corruption to support his thesis but minimizes counterexamples where the Fed played a stabilizing role, such as during the Great Depression reforms or the 2008 financial crisis, though even those remain debated. 3. Simplification of economic complexity. The book tends to reduce multifaceted global economic developments to the machinations of a small elite. While such narratives are rhetorically powerful, they overlook structural, political, and technological factors that also shape monetary systems. 4. Speculative conclusions. Griffin's prediction of a unified global banking system and currency, while influential in populist discourse, remains speculative and lacks strong empirical grounding. Legacy and influence. Regardless of scholarly dispute, The Creature from Jekyll Island has had undeniable impact. It has become a central text for critics of central banking, inspiring libertarian movements, Federal Reserve audits, and even shaping political rhetoric by figures such as Ron Paul. Its longevity demonstrates how financial institutions, opaque and technical by nature, are particularly vulnerable to narratives that frame them as conspiratorial power centers. The book's popularity also underscores a broader cultural distrust of institutions. In this sense, Griffin's work functions less as a conventional economic treatise and more as a political manifesto against centralized power in all forms. George Edward Griffin's The Creature from Jekyll Island is best understood not as objective economic history but as a populist critique of monetary power. Its strength lies in dramatizing the creation and operation of the Federal Reserve, making obscure financial mechanisms accessible and alarming. Yet its reliance on conspiratorial framing, selective evidence, and speculative conclusions diminishes its scholarly credibility. The book remains influential because it taps into genuine anxieties about financial systems, but it should be read critically, with an awareness of the distinction between persuasive rhetoric and historical consensus. The book is divided into 5 main sections with multiple chapters. Let's take a brief look at each chapter. Section 1, A Crash Course on Money. Griffin opens with the basics of banking and money creation, using storytelling to make it accessible. Chapter 1, The Journey to Jekyll Island. This chapter describes the secret 1910 meeting of bankers and politicians on Jekyll Island, Georgia, where the Federal Reserve System was planned. Griffin portrays it as a conspiracy to form a banking cartel. Chapter 2, The Name of the Game is Bailout. The chapter explains how bailouts allow banks to take risks, privatize profits, and socialize losses. Costs are shifted to taxpayers. Chapter 3, Protectors of the Public. This chapter critiques the idea that the Fed protects the public, claiming instead that its primary function is to protect banks from competition and failure. Chapter 4, Home, Sweet Loan. The chapter introduces the Mandrake mechanism, Griffin's metaphor for fractional reserve banking, showing how banks create money out of nothing when issuing loans. Section 2, A Crash Course on the Federal Reserve. Focuses on the Fed's role in U.S. history, especially in financing government expansion. Chapter 5, Nearer to the Heart's Desire. Chapter 5 explains how the Fed allowed the U.S. to finance World War I through inflation and debt without immediately raising taxes. Chapter 6, Building the New World Order. This chapter argues that international bankers aimed for global control, linking the Fed to broader movements toward international central banking. Chapter 7, The London Connection. The chapter suggests strong ties between Wall Street banks and the Bank of England, portraying the Fed as part of a larger Anglo-American financial elite. Section 3, A Crash Course on War. It explores the connection between banking, credit, and warfare. Chapter 8, Fool's Gold. Chapter 8 discusses how gold has historically been manipulated by banks and governments, undermining its stability as money. Chapter 9, The Secret Science. In this chapter Griffin explains inflation as a hidden tax that transfers wealth from the public to government and banks. Chapter 10, The Name of the Game is Empire. Chapter 10 argues that modern wars, World War I, World War II, Cold War conflicts, would have been impossible without the credit expansion enabled by the Fed. Section 4, A Crash Course on Big Brother. Broadens the focus from the Fed to its role in fostering centralized power. Chapter 11, The Rothschild Formula. This chapter introduces the idea that banking families, like the Rothschilds, profited from financing both sides in wars, setting a precedent for modern central banking. Chapter 12, Sink the Lusitania. Chapter 12 suggests that U.S. entry into World War I was manipulated through events like the Lusitania sinking, with banking interests pushing for war financing. Chapter 13, Masquerade in Moscow. In Chapter 13 Griffin argues that Western bankers funded the Soviet Union, seeing communism not as an enemy but as a tool for global financial control. Chapter 14, The Best Enemies Money Can Buy. Extends this argument into World War II and the Cold War, claiming Western banks profited from financing both sides of global conflicts. Section 5, a crash course on the future. It concludes by projecting Griffin's warnings into the future. Chapter 15, The New Alchemy. This chapter explores fiat money, showing how paper currencies are vulnerable to collapse. Chapter 16, The New World Order. In Chapter 16, Griffin predicts the rise of a global central bank and currency, which he sees as the ultimate objective of the Federal Reserve System. Chapter 17, A Preview of Coming Attractions. Chapter 17 warns of financial collapse, hyperinflation, and the erosion of national sovereignty if central banking continues unchecked. Chapter 18, A Strategy for Freedom. Griffin concludes with his call to action: abolish the Federal Reserve, return to sound money, gold standard, and decentralize financial power. We hope you have enjoyed watching the video. Let us know about your favorite books. Thank you.